It was a silent autumn morning, the kind that carries more than just the chill of the season. The air smelled faintly of fallen leaves, but for Amina, it also reeked of farewells. She stood motionless at the doorway of the unfamiliar house she now called home, eyes fixed on the yellow taxi idling at the curb. Her husband, Amer, was inside, bound for another state where a new job awaited him. He waved to her gently through the cracked window and managed a faint smile, a tired, rehearsed farewell that didn't reach his eyes. Amina didn't wave back. Her arms felt too heavy, her soul even heavier. It wasn't just sadness that gripped her. It was grief. A silent, agonizing kind of grief that only women left behind in unfamiliar places know. Amer wasn't just her husband. He was her protector, her only friend, the one person she could rely on in this strange, cold house that never quite felt like hers. The moment the taxi disappeared around the corner, Amina shut the door. Her fingers trembled on the handle. Before she could turn away, she heard hard, dragging footsteps behind her. It was Tabinda, her mother-in-law. The woman was in her early 50s, with sharp features carved by years of bitterness and judgment. Her eyes held no warmth, and her mouth rarely moved without malice. Without a word of comfort, she yanked Amina's arm and pulled her inside, closing the door with a loud thud. "You're crying as if your husband died," Tabinda muttered with disgust. "Have you lost your mind? He's just traveling, not vanishing forever. Is this how you say goodbye? What kind of omen are you trying to bring on my son?" Amina didn't answer. Her voice had left her. Tabinda stormed across the room and returned with an old, dusty string instrument that looked like a worn-out guitar. "Here," she said, shoving it into Amina's hands. "Occupy yourself with something useful instead of sitting around weeping like a widow." Amina stared at the instrument blankly. She didn't want it. She didn't want to play, to sing, or to pretend she was okay. But she took it anyway, not out of obedience, but out of exhaustion. She climbed the stairs to her room slowly, the instrument dangling limply from her hand. Upstairs, the silence felt heavier. The walls seemed more distant. The bed she had shared with Amer was untouched, the scent of his cologne still lingering on the pillow. She sat down, and then she cried, not in sobs or screams, but in slow, endless tears that soaked her scarf. She cried like a woman who had just been left behind in a world that didn't want her. Downstairs, Tabinda hummed quietly as if nothing had happened. But something had. Something had shifted in the air, and Amina's lonely battle was just beginning. That evening, the chill in the air crept into Amina's bones. She hadn't moved from the bed for hours. Her scarf was still damp with tears, and the old instrument sat untouched on the dresser. The room felt colder now, even with the windows shut, but what chilled her wasn't the weather. It was the heavy sense of isolation pressing down on her chest like a stone. Without knocking, Tabinda barged into the room. Her presence carried a judgmental weight, like a judge entering a courtroom. She stood there for a long moment, eyes sweeping over Amina's clothes. "Why are you still wearing that red scarf?" she asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Do you still think you're a bride? That color doesn't suit you anymore. Your husband's gone." Amina didn't respond. She just stared at the floor. Tabinda tossed a folded black shawl onto the bed. "Here," she said, "wear this. Black suits you better now." The words felt like needles. The red scarf had been a small piece of comfort, a reminder of better days, of love, of being seen. And now even that was being stripped away. But Amina had no strength to argue. She reached for the black shawl and slowly wrapped it around her shoulders. It wasn't just fabric. It felt like a burial cloth, not for her body, but for her spirit. That night, sleep never came. The silence in the house was deep and oppressive. Amina lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind tangled in fear and sorrow. Her body was sore from housework. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, all now her responsibility alone. The house was large, but the loneliness inside it was even bigger. By morning, her head was pounding. She had barely eaten the day before, and her legs felt weak. As she stood at the sink, washing dishes, a sharp pain surged through her skull. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. "I'm not feeling well," she said weakly to Tabinda, who was reading a magazine on the sofa. "I have a fever and a terrible headache. I want to go to my mother's house." Tabinda didn't even look up. "You're just looking for an excuse to run," she replied coldly aside. "Stay put. I'll give you something that'll fix you right up." A few minutes later, she returned with a small glass bottle filled with thick black oil. "Lay down," she ordered. Amina hesitated. The oil looked strange, almost murky, and gave off a heavy, musky smell like burned herbs and mildew. But fear silenced her instincts. She lay down as Tabinda began to massage her scalp with the oil, pressing it into her skin with firm, deliberate hands. The burning began almost immediately. "My head, it's burning," Amina gasped. Tabinda chuckled darkly. That means it's working. Don't complain. You'll feel better in a week." But Amina didn't believe her. That night, the pain only grew, and something darker had just been set into motion. The night dragged on like a slow-moving shadow. Amina tossed and turned in her bed, her head pulsing with pain. The burning sensation from the oil hadn't faded. If anything, it had settled deeper into her scalp, as if her skin had absorbed something foul, something wrong. Her limbs were heavy, her body unresponsive, as though whatever had been rubbed into her skin was now crawling through her veins. She stared at the ceiling until morning. The next day was no better. The dizziness returned, her eyes refused to focus, and her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Amina tried to stay upright, pushing through housework, but her body kept betraying her. On the third night, she couldn't take it anymore. When Tabinda stepped out to answer a phone call, Amina crept to her room and took the bottle of black oil from the corner shelf. She wrapped it in an old hand towel and hid it in a shoebox beneath her bed. Far away from her skin, her mind, and her body, something inside her told her this wasn't just some herbal remedy. This was something darker. Something meant to weaken her, not heal her. That night, as she lay in the dark pretending to sleep, strange sounds drifted through the hallway. Voices, low, muffled, and tense. Amina turned off the ceiling fan to hear more clearly. Then, slowly and silently, she got up and walked to her door, pressing her ear against the wood. The voices were coming from Tabinda's room. Her heart pounded. Carefully, she opened her door and tiptoed down the hallway, stopping just outside the room. Through a small crack in the doorframe, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Two men stood in the room, dressed in black cloaks, faces partially covered. They spoke in hushed voices while Tabinda handed them small bags filled with fabric, photos, and other objects. Amina blinked, stunned. She saw some of her own belongings among the items on the table. A scarf, a locket, a photograph of her sleeping. Her throat tightened. What was this? A business deal? A robbery? Or something worse? A ritual? Was this black oil part of something spiritual? Something meant to bind her? Control her? She backed away slowly, returning to her room with trembling legs. Her thoughts raced. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay awake, repeating one thought. If I don't get out of this house soon, I may never get out at all. The next morning, her voice finally found strength. She confronted Tabinda over breakfast. "Who were those men in your room last night?" she asked. "And why were my things on the table?" Tabinda stared at her, unblinking. "You don't need to know everything," she said with a twisted smile. "What I do is for your own good." But Amina had crossed a line, not in rebellion, but in realization. She knew now. This woman was not just cold or cruel, she was dangerous. The following morning was unusually cold, but Amina's body was colder still. Her temperature had dropped, yet her head throbbed with an unnatural ache that no sleep or medicine could touch. Sunlight seeped through the curtains, but the room remained dim, shadowed by something far deeper than the weather. She tried to sit up, but faltered. Her limbs were stiff, unresponsive, as if her body no longer belonged to her. Staggering to the door, she opened it slowly and looked around. Silence. No sound of pots in the kitchen, no movement, no scent of food. She wandered toward the kitchen and collapsed onto the wooden chair by the table, holding her head in her hands. The pressure in her skull was unbearable. Moments later, Tabinda appeared behind her, holding a shallow bowl of soup. Her expression was strange, a forced smile, thin and almost amused. "Eat," she said softly. "It'll make you feel better. Just a little mix of herbs I prepared for you." Amina looked down. The soup was black. Not dark brown, not muddy. Black. It smelled like oil and iron, like something that had no business in a kitchen. She hesitated. Her heart beat faster. Was this soup another remedy or something else? Tabinda stood over her, waiting. Amina dipped the spoon into the bowl and brought it to her lips, but at the last second she twisted her wrist and spilled it discreetly into a handkerchief in her lap. She repeated the motion again and again, pretending to sip, but discarding every drop. Her instincts screamed louder than ever. This was no cure. This was poison in disguise. That evening, Salvation knocked on the door. Literally. Her old friend Nazreen arrived, unexpected, like a forgotten warmth returning on a freezing night. Amina hadn't seen her since her wedding day. They hugged tightly. Amina clung to her as if she'd been lost at sea and finally reached shore. Nazreen stepped back and looked at her carefully. "What happened to you?" she asked gently. "You look different. Pale. Weak." Amina tried to smile, but her lips quivered. "I'm fine. Just tired. Amer's out of town." But Nazreen saw through her, her eyes filled with concern. She sat close, placing a hand over Amina's. "If you want to talk, I'm here," she said softly. "Don't carry this alone. We're sisters, remember?" Amina wanted to speak. She wanted to scream, but all she could do was nod. Still, in that moment, something shifted. Just having someone near, someone who believed in her, gave her a thread of strength to hold on to. Later, as she made tea for her friend, Amina felt a sudden wave of nausea. She excused herself, rushed to her room, and collapsed on the bed. Her stomach churned violently. Something was wrong again. Something in her body reacting to what she'd been forced to endure. The next morning, Nazreen was gone. A small note left behind said she had errands to run and would return soon, but she never did. And Amina was alone once more, not just in the house, but in a place darker than before. The house was too quiet again, the kind of silence that wraps itself around your throat and makes it hard to breathe. Amina stood near the window, her arms wrapped around her waist. Nazreen hadn't returned. No call, no message, just vanished. Amina replayed their conversation over and over in her mind, wondering if her friend had sensed something, or worse, that had been forced away. Later that afternoon, while she was folding laundry, a sharp dizziness overtook her. She leaned against the wall, gasping, and stumbled toward the kitchen. She reached for the water bottle, but her fingers slipped. Her body collapsed to the floor. The room spun around her, colors blurred, and the walls felt like they were closing in. She woke hours later, disoriented, sprawled across her bed, and beside her on the nightstand sat the bottle of black oil. She hadn't put it there. Her heart clenched. Who had brought it back? Had Tabinda found it? Was this a warning? She stared at the bottle like it was alive, and in that moment she decided, no more. That evening, when Tabinda entered her room with her usual phrase, "It's time for your head massage," Amina sat upright and calmly said, "Not tonight. I feel better now." Tabinda narrowed her eyes, clearly surprised. Her expression hardened. "As you wish," she said coldly, "but don't regret it later." Amina barely slept that night. A sound woke her, a faint creak, then footsteps. She held her breath and walked slowly to her door. Gently, she pressed her eye to the keyhole. She saw Tabinda in the hallway, dressed in a long black scarf, carrying something small in her hand. She moved silently, her presence unsettling. Then she turned and entered a room, not Amina's, but one across the hall, a room that was always locked, the so-called fever room. Amina had never dared to question it. But now, something inside her cracked open. She waited until Tabinda left through the back door, then she moved. Her hands trembled as she opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by slats of light from a high window. What she saw stole the breath from her lungs, a wooden table in the center. On it, her personal items, a photograph of her sleeping, a lock of her hair, pieces of clothing. Next to them, the bottle of oil, a burned candle, and black ash scattered like powder. A folded paper with her full name written upside down, soaked with something red. She stepped back, horrified. This wasn't superstition, this was something evil. Suddenly, the back door creaked again. Tabinda was returning. Amina slipped out, closed the fever room quietly, and fled to her room. She didn't cry, she didn't scream, she just sat on her bed, shaking, as a terrifying truth settled deep into her bones. She was being used, and she might never have been meant to survive it. Amina woke before dawn, her mind already racing. She had seen enough: the photograph, the hair, the strange writings. Whatever was happening in that fever room wasn't healing. It was ritual, dark, deliberate, and targeted. Her. It was all about her, and the black oil. It wasn't medicine. It was a weapon disguised as care. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't even pray. The house itself felt defiled. As the first light broke across the sky, Amina made her move. She tiptoed out of her room, clutching the bottle of oil tightly in her fist like it might bite her. Her footsteps were soundless against the tiled floor as she slipped through the back door and into the cold morning air. In the corner of the garden stood 2 old palm trees. She knelt between them and dug a small hole with her bare hands. The earth was damp, resisting her fingers, but she didn't stop. She poured the entire contents of the bottle into the ground. The smell was foul, like something long dead, and as the last drop disappeared into the soil, she whispered under her breath, "Let this end here." She covered the hole and placed a small stone over it, then tucked the empty bottle inside an old metal toolbox behind the shed. But peace didn't last long. That evening, as they sat in the living room, Tabinda's eyes swept over the shelves. Then she asked calmly, "Where is the oil? I don't see it in its place." Amina turned her head, feigning confusion. "Maybe you moved it to the other room?" "I haven't touched it." Tabinda didn't answer. She just stared, not angrily, but curiously. That was worse. Finally, she said with unsettling softness, "Strange. That oil doesn't just walk away on its own." She stood up and leaned closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Be careful," she said. "There are things in this world that don't die when you bury them. They return, sometimes in other forms." Amina's stomach twisted. That night she didn't sleep, not out of fear, but anger. Burning, boiling, suffocating anger. She had tried silence. She had tried patience. She had tried pretending to be smaller than her pain, but the fear had only grown fangs. Lying in bed, her eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling. Her fists were clenched under the blanket. Should I keep pretending? Or is it time to stand up? Even if it means falling hard. Just before sunrise, clouds gathered outside, thick and heavy, painting the sky in tones of gray. Something was building. Not in the sky, in her. Amina sat up at the edge of her bed. Her eyes were dry now, but sharp, focused. Enough was enough. No one was coming to save her. No husband, no friend, no miracle. This was her war, and she was done fighting it with silence. The clouds outside thickened as daylight faded. Amina sat at her window, the black shawl draped around her like armor. She wasn't crying anymore. She wasn't trembling either. Something inside her had shifted, from fear to fury, from victim to witness. She thought about Amer, how he had promised to protect her, then vanished. How he had left her in a house that felt more like a trap than a home. Would he even believe her if she told him? She wasn't sure anymore. Then, a sound. Not loud, just soft enough to pull her from her thoughts. A faint creak, like the groan of an old door hinge. She froze, then moved quickly to the small window beside her bedroom door that overlooked the entrance hallway. Someone was there. A man. Dressed in dark clothes, his head covered. He was stepping quietly out of Tabinda's room. Amina's heart slammed into her chest, her breath caught in her throat. Who was he? Why was he there? As he moved down the hallway, the light from the overhead bulb caught his face briefly, and Amina's stomach dropped. He wasn't a stranger. She couldn't place it immediately, but something in his features felt familiar, hauntingly so, like a face from a dream that turns into a nightmare when you wake. And then he was gone. Vanished through the back door, Amina stepped away from the window, her hands shaking, her breath shallow. What was he doing in Tabinda's room? Why at this hour? What are they hiding? The next morning, Tabinda was calm, suspiciously calm. She moved through the kitchen with an eerie lightness, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. She served Amina tea with a sugar-sweet smile. Amina sat across the table staring at her. The image of the man from the night before still fresh in her mind. Finally, she said, "I heard something at the door last night. Did someone come by?" Tabinda looked up, her smile unshaken. "Oh, probably just a neighbor asking for sugar," she said lightly. "You know how people are around here." The lie was casual, smooth, too smooth. Amina said nothing more, but her decision was clear. No more confrontation. No more questions. I'll gather proof. I'll expose you, quietly. In the days that followed, Tabinda's behavior changed. She stopped giving Amina chores. She stopped criticizing her. She even told her to rest. "You look tired, my dear." But Amina knew better. Kindness from cruel people is never kindness. It's strategy. One afternoon, while Tabinda was out, Amina slipped back into the fever room. This time, she found something new. A small, dark wooden box, ornately carved, heavy. Inside it were things that made her blood freeze. Another photo of her sleeping. A plastic bag holding a lock of her hair. A strip of fabric torn from one of her dresses. A folded paper with not just her name, but the names of other women. It wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. This wasn't personal. This was a pattern. Amina stood frozen in front of the wooden box, her fingers trembling above the names scrawled on the paper. Some names she didn't recognize. Others rang faint bells. Whispers from distant conversations. Former neighbors, women who had simply vanished. She backed away slowly, her pulse pounding in her ears. This was bigger than superstition. Bigger than personal vengeance. This was calculated, repeated, and buried under the illusion of tradition and care. She needed help. Her first thought was to call her mother, but her phone, the only one in the house, was always kept on a hook in the living room, and every time Amer left, Tabinda took it upon herself to control it. "Just in case," she always said, "so you don't bother him while he's working." That night, Amina waited until the house was silent. Then she slipped out of her room barefoot and crept into the living room. The old rotary phone hung on the wall like a sentinel. Her hand reached for the receiver. But she froze. Behind her, a voice. "Who are you calling at this hour?" Amina turned slowly. Tabinda was standing behind her in the dark hallway, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "I just wanted to check on my mother," Amina said, her voice barely a whisper. "I haven't heard from her in a week." "I'll call her for you," Tabinda said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Go back to your room." Amina obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because she felt like a trapped animal. One wrong move and she'd be crushed. Back in her room, she sat on her bed, heart hammering. The house wasn't just physically locked, it was spiritually sealed, with fear, with control, with secrets. And that night, the whispers began again. She heard them through the walls as faint, eerie voices. A door opening, footsteps, the creak of a bed, the rustle of fabric. But one voice rose above the rest, Tabinda's. "I'll hand her over tomorrow. Everything is ready." Amina's blood ran cold. Hand her over? To whom? Why? Was she going to be sold, sacrificed, silenced? The next morning, Tabinda entered her room casually, as if nothing had happened. "We're going out today," she said, fluffing the pillow like a doting grandmother. "Remember the woman who gave you the oil? She wants to see you again. She says you're out of balance." Amina's throat dried. I'm not sure I need anything," she muttered. "Nonsense," Tabinda replied cheerfully. "A quick visit. You'll be back before you know it." Amina felt like a puppet, strings tugged by unseen hands. She didn't resist. She couldn't. The car ride was long. Fields turned to forest and forest into dusty roads that led to the outskirts of the city. The house was old, crooked, and eerily quiet. As Tabinda opened the creaky door and beckoned her in, Amina took one final glance at the road behind her. It looked so far away now, like freedom slipping out of reach. The house felt like it had been untouched by time. or light. Its walls were stained with age, its windows clouded by dust. The air inside was thick, saturated with the smell of herbs, incense, and something else. Something raw, metallic. Amina hesitated at the threshold, but Tabinda nudged her forward with a gentle push. Inside, an old woman sat cross-legged on a woven mat, dressed in layered traditional robes. Her eyes were sharp, not wise, but piercing, predatory. She didn't smile. She simply stared at Amina as though reading her soul. "This is her," Tabinda said. The old woman nodded and motioned toward the floor. "Sit." Amina's knees locked. She didn't want to sit. Everything in her screamed run, but her body didn't move. Moments later, a young girl entered, holding a metal tray. On it were strange objects: bird feathers, bones, vials of thick-colored liquid, and what looked like ashes mixed with oil. "We'll restore the balance in your body," the old woman said, her voice deep and gravelly. "Do not resist." Amina's mouth was dry, her palms were sweating. "I don't need treatment," she said shakily. "I just want to go home." The old woman smiled. Not kindly, but knowingly. "Your home is not where you came from, it's where we will take you." Amina's heart nearly stopped. Her mind raced. Her body, however, still felt frozen. Her feet were rooted to the floor, like something invisible held them in place. She looked over at the tray again. The tools weren't for healing, they were for binding, claiming, cursing, a ritual, not a cure. She was being offered, or maybe traded. Behind her, Tabinda stood silently, watching like a puppet master at the edge of a stage. "No," Amina said, barely above a whisper. The old woman moved closer. "Sit, child, don't make this harder." Amina stood up, sudden and firm. Her voice finally erupted from her chest. "I won't be part of this. I want out. This is not healing. This is witchcraft." The old woman's eyes narrowed. "Sit down, or you will never get out of here." Amina's breath quickened. Her hands trembled, then curled into fists. In one sudden motion, she lunged forward and flipped the tray off the table. Bones and bottles clattered to the floor. Feathers flew. Candles toppled. Chaos. Then she turned and ran. She didn't wait to see who chased her. She didn't hear if they screamed. She just ran. Through the hallway, past the crooked doors, out the front, and into the open field beyond. Her bare feet tore across dry grass and thorns, but she didn't stop. She was crying. Not in weakness. In release. In defiance. In desperation. "Save me, God, just get me out of here." Hours later, she found herself slumped at a roadside bus stop, exhausted and shaking. A kind older woman spotted her and asked gently, "What happened to you, sweetheart?" Amina could only answer with one sentence: "I just want to go to my mother's house." And finally, someone listened. 2 hours later, Amina stood in front of the small gate of her childhood home, her clothes torn, her face streaked with tears and dust. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the bell. The door opened before she could press it. Her mother gasped, a cry that shattered the stillness of the afternoon. "Oh my God, Amina!" Amina collapsed into her arms, sobbing with everything she had left inside. In the days that followed, she told her parents everything. Every chilling detail. The oil, the burning, the strange men in cloaks. The fever room, the photographs, the ritual. Tabinda's games. The poison disguised as tradition. Her mother wept as she held her. Her father didn't cry. He grew silent, then stern. "You're not going back," he said. We will confront this, and we'll find out exactly what they've been doing." But Amina felt torn. As much as she hated what had happened, her heart still flinched at the name Amer. The man who once made her feel safe. The man she had once trusted more than herself. But that illusion crumbled the moment he called. The phone rang late one night. Amina answered, her voice weak but composed. "Peace be upon you." Amer's voice on the other end was cold, distant. "My mother told me everything," he said. "She said you've been sneaking out, hiding things, that you've been involved with strange men." Amina's lips quivered. "She's lying. I swear to God, I did nothing. She tried to destroy me, Amer. You weren't here to see it. I don't want excuses, he said flatly. I'll call again. Then the line went dead. That was the last thread. Amina broke down again. But this time, it was the breaking of illusions, not hope. Her mother cupped her face gently. My daughter, the man who cannot see your truth with his own eyes does not deserve to hold your heart. The next week, divorce papers arrived in the mail. Her marriage was over, but she wasn't. Amina rose. She enrolled in training classes, learned a new skill, took control of her finances, and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt her life. Months later, a kind man, a widower with a gentle daughter, proposed. He wasn't rich, but he was steady, honest, and kind. She accepted. 1 year into her new marriage, Amina was walking in the market with her husband and stepdaughter when she spotted a frail figure sitting on the curb, a woman in tattered clothes, hair uncombed, eyes lost. It was Tabinda, alone, forgotten, hollow. What happened to you? Amina asked quietly. Everything, the old woman whispered. Amer left, the house is empty, no one visits. Amina said nothing. She didn't need revenge. God had handled that for her. She walked away, stronger, freer. Years passed. Her new home wasn't perfect, but it was real, filled with love, laughter, peace. She often sat on the balcony in the evenings, sipping tea as her husband joined her. I've never seen you smile like this, he said one night. I'm just remembering, Amina replied. Some wounds never fully heal, but they stop bleeding, and that's a blessing.